The internet, it's so wrapped up in everything we do, it's kind of hard to imagine life without it, right? But here's the wild part. Its origin story, it has almost nothing to do with connecting you and me and everything to do with surviving a nuclear war. Yeah, you heard that right. Let's get into it.
You see, this is the first thing to get. The internet wasn't invented in some flash of genius in a Silicon Valley garage. No way. It evolved. It was this slow burn process, really. A chain reaction of huge problems, each one sparking a brilliant new solution, all built on top of each other for like 50 years.
Yep, you heard me. To find the very first spark of our global network, we're not going to California. We're going back in time, right to the peak of the Cold War. A time of, intense paranoia and tension when everyone was looking up at the sky with, well, a mix of awe and total dread.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with its military roots as a Cold War network. Then we'll see how all these separate networks learned to speak a common language. After that, we'll hit the big one, how the web changed everything, and then how it became the people's internet. Finally, we'll look at where we are now and what's next in our digital future.
Okay, part one, a Cold War network. And it all started with a really, really scary problem, the problem of survival. The US military was thinking, what happens if there's a nuclear attack? How do we communicate? They needed a system that could take a massive hit and just keep working. So the big question was, how do you build a network that has no center, no single point of failure?
In this timeline, it tells the whole story in just 3 steps. It all kicks off in 1957. The Soviet Union launches Sputnik. And for the US, this is a huge shock, a massive wake-up call. So what happens? Just 1 year later, in 58, they create ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. Its whole job was basically to make sure America was never caught off guard by technology again. And their biggest, most ambitious project? A crazy new network called ARPANET, which came online in 1969.
So, what was the secret sauce that made ARPANET so resilient? It was this absolutely game-changing idea called packet switching. See, instead of one long, unbroken connection, kind of like a phone call, your data got chopped up into these tiny little packets. Now, here's the genius part. Each packet could take a totally different route to get to its destination, where they'd all be put back together. So, what does that mean? It means if a bomb takes out one part of the network, no big deal. The packets just find another way around it. It was, quite literally, a network designed to survive.
And you gotta love how it all began. This quote from Leonard Kleinrock, one of the pioneers, just says it all. The very first message they ever tried to send on this revolutionary new network was the word login. They typed the L, and the team on the other end said, yep, we got the L. They typed the O, got the L. And then they typed the G, and the whole system crashed. Just boom, 2 letters. But even in that little failure, a revolution had just kicked off.
All right, so on to our next chapter, forging a common language. Because look, ARPANET was a massive success, but its success led to a whole new problem. It worked, but it was basically an island. And all over the world, other little network islands were starting to pop up, and none of them could talk to each other. The new challenge wasn't survival anymore, it was connection.
Yeah, by the 1970s, you had multiple networks running, but they all spoke totally different languages. I mean, think of it like a digital Tower of Babel. You've got all these brilliant people building these incredible networks, but each one is using its own special rules, its own protocols. They just couldn't understand each other.
And we're not talking about just a few. You had ARPANET over in the USA, the NPL network in the UK, another one called Cyclades in France, and so many others. Each one was its own little universe, totally sealed off from the rest. The dream of a truly global network, it was just impossible, until they could all find a common language to speak. And the solution, well, it came from these 2 guys, Vint Cerf and Kahn. And it was brilliant. They developed a universal set of rules called TCP/IP. You can basically think of it as the digital Rosetta Stone for networks. It was this amazing translator that didn't care what the local network's language was. It created this universal layer on top that let all of them talk to each other. And that right there was the birth of internetworking, or as we know it, the internet.
And we can actually point to the exact day it happened. January 1st, 1983. On that day, in this huge coordinated switchover, the original ARPANET officially adopted TCP/IP, and that's the day most people consider the official birthday of the internet we use today. So, happy late birthday, internet.
Okay, so the internet is born. It's connecting universities and military bases. But now we've got a brand new problem, usability. For the average person, the internet was basically impossible to use. It was this complex, tech-based world for engineers and academics only. The rest of us were just locked out.
I mean, forget about mice or icons or anything like that. To do anything on the early internet, you had to type in these really complex commands. You had to know the exact, long, clunky name of the specific computer you were trying to reach. It was powerful, for sure, but user-friendly, not even close.
Well, all of that changed in 1990 thanks to one guy, Tim Berners-Lee, who was a researcher at CERN at the time. He invented a whole new system to make all this information easy to find and navigate. He came up with 3 core building blocks. First, HTML, a simple way to build web pages. Second, HTTP, a protocol to send those pages across the internet. And third, the URL, basically a unique, simple address for every single page. And what did he call this new system? The World Wide Web. And the impact? Just look at this. This chart shows the number of computers connected to the internet. In 1991, right after the web was invented, you're looking at about 700,000. Fast forward less than a decade to the year 2000, and that number has skyrocketed to more than 93 million. The web didn't just help the internet grow, it completely unleashed it on the world.
Which brings us to our next major shift, creating the people's internet. Because even though the web was now a global phenomenon, it was still mostly a one-way street. The problem was participation. A few people made websites, and a whole lot of people, well, they just read them. The next big challenge was turning the internet from a giant read-only library into a massive global conversation.
And this is where we see the shift from what we now call Web 1.0 to Web 2.0. Think of it this way. Web 1.0 was the read web. You went online to consume information from static pages. But Web 2.0, that became the read-write web. Suddenly, you weren't just a consumer, you were a creator. This was the dawn of interactive platforms, of user-generated content, of social networks.
And of course, this shift gave us some of the most iconic platforms of the 2000s. You had MySpace in 2003, then Facebook, WordPress, YouTube, and Twitter all popping up within just a few years. All of a sudden, the internet wasn't a place you went to get information anymore. It was a place you went to share your life, your opinions, your videos, everything.
And if you need one single moment that captured this incredible shift, this is it. In 2006, Time magazine's Person of the Year wasn't a world leader or a CEO. The cover was literally a mirror. The Person of the Year was you. It was the ultimate statement that the power of the web had finally, definitively been handed over to its users.
And that brings us right up to today, and into our final section, our digital future. Because after all those decades of innovation, this globally connected world we've built, well, it's now facing a whole new set of really complex problems. The problems of today and tomorrow.
One of the biggest, most persistent challenges is something called the digital divide. You know, for many of us, the internet feels like a basic utility, right? Like electricity or running water. But the reality is, billions of people across the globe still don't have reliable access. And that creates this huge gap in everything from education to economic opportunity. And as we look to the future, you start hearing a lot about this thing called Web 3.0. What's the big idea here? Well, it's about making the web smarter and more decentralized. The goal is to use new technologies, like AI and the blockchain, to try and shift power away from the handful of giant tech platforms and put it back into the hands of individual users, giving us more ownership of our own data.
Which really leaves us with this one big question to think about. The internet started out as this open, collaborative, totally decentralized project. It was built on a spirit of sharing. But today, so much of our online experience is shaped and controlled by just a handful of huge companies. So as we move into this next chapter, the biggest question of all might just be, will that original open spirit of the internet manage to endure?